My parents yelled in my face, "You and your kid are just freeloaders," while living in my house. My name is Lauren Mitchell, and I am 35 years old. On the morning my life finally broke in two, the only sounds in my kitchen were the hum of the refrigerator I'd paid for and my father stirring his coffee in a mug I'd bought. My mother was reading a magazine at my table in my chair. They had been living with me for 10 months, a stay that was only supposed to last a few weeks. The air was thick with their entitlement, a feeling I had learned to breathe like toxic air. My father cleared his throat, the sound of a judge about to deliver a verdict. "Your mother and I feel like we're being taken for granted," he said, his voice heavy with self-pity. I turned from the window to face him, and he leaned forward, his eyes cold and hard. Then he spat the words that would burn down the last bridge between us. "You and your kid are just freeloaders." He said this in my house, about me and my 12-year-old son. Something inside me didn't just break. It vaporized. The years of obligation, of seeking their approval, of swallowing my own needs, it all turned to dust. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply placed my coffee cup on the counter, looked him dead in the eye, and said the quietest, heaviest words of my life, "Then it's time you find somewhere else to stay." Before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, drop a comment, where are you watching from? To understand how we got to that kitchen table, you have to go back 16 years. I was 19. I was hopeful. I had a life ahead of me that felt full of possibility, a life I was going to build for myself. And I had a safety net, a gift from the one person in my family who had always seen me for who I was, my grandmother. Grandma Betty passed away when I was a freshman in college. She was my mother's mom, but she and I had a special connection. She was quiet like me. She noticed things. She saw how my older brother, Mark, got all the attention, all the praise. She saw how I faded into the background, always trying to be good, to not cause trouble. Before she died, she pulled me aside in her hospital room. The room smelled of antiseptic and wilting flowers. Her hand was thin and cool in mine. "Lauren," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves, "I left something for you. Don't let them take it from you. You use it for your education. You make something of yourself." I didn't understand the warning then. A few weeks after the funeral, the letter from her lawyer arrived. She had left me $120,000 in a trust that became available on my 19th birthday. It was a staggering amount of money. It was more money than I had ever imagined holding. It wasn't just money. It was freedom. It was 4 years of college without debt. It was a down payment on a small apartment after graduation. It was a future, my future. I remember sitting on my bed in my dorm room, staring at the check from the estate. I felt a sense of security I had never known. For the first time, I felt like I was in control. That feeling lasted for less than a week. I made the mistake of telling my parents about the money during a weekend visit home. I was excited. I wanted to share my good news. I thought they would be happy for me. My father's eyes lit up, but not with pride. It was a different kind of light, a calculating one. My brother Mark, who was there for dinner, whistled low. "Wow, Lori, you hit the jackpot," he said, punching my arm playfully. It didn't feel playful. The conversation happened that Sunday, just before I was supposed to drive back to campus. My mother had made a pot roast. We were all sitting in the living room, a room that always felt too formal, too staged. My father muted the football game on the TV. That's how I knew it was serious. "Lauren, your brother and I have been talking," he began. He used the same opening line he would use 16 years later at my kitchen table. "We have an opportunity here, a family opportunity." He laid out a plan. He and Mark wanted to expand the family business, a small construction company that was always struggling. They wanted to buy a new piece of equipment, a small crane, that would allow them to take on bigger, more profitable jobs. "The banks are a nightmare," my father said, shaking his head. "The interest rates, the paperwork, it's impossible for the little guy." Then Mark chimed in, his voice smooth and persuasive. "But with an investment, a real cash investment, we could skip all that. We could be profitable in 6 months. And Lori, we'd make you a partner, an investor." They made it sound so official, so grown up. An investor. It was a word that made me feel important. "This is a chance to build something for the whole family," Dad said, his voice earnest. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "You'll get it all back, sweetheart. With interest. We'll draw up a contract. You'll probably make $20,000, $30,000 on top of your original investment. It's a sure thing." I hesitated. I remembered my grandmother's words. "Don't let them take it from you." But these were my father and my brother. This was my family. They wouldn't take something from me. They were asking me to help, to be part of the team. All my life, I had felt like I was on the outside. This felt like my chance to finally be on the inside. I don't know. I said. Grandma said it was for college. My mother, who had been quiet the whole time, finally spoke. She reached over and patted my knee. Her touch was meant to be comforting, but it felt like a trap. Honey, your father and your brother know business. And family helps family. That's what's most important. You can still go to college. You can take out some small loans. Everyone does it. They had an answer for everything. For every doubt, they had a promise. For every question, they had a vision of a shared, prosperous future. They talked for over an hour. They used words like legacy and team and our future. By the end, my head was spinning. My $120,000 had been transformed from my personal safety net into a family obligation. Saying no felt selfish. It felt like I was betraying them. The next day, I went to the bank with my father. I endorsed the check from my grandmother's estate and signed the transfer papers to move the money into his business account. There was no contract. When I asked about it, he just laughed and tousled my hair. We don't need paperwork, honey. We're family. The business failed in less than a year. The new crane, it turned out, required expensive maintenance and a specialized operator they couldn't afford to keep on staff. They underbid a few big jobs and lost a fortune. The money didn't just dwindle. It vanished. It was gone. All of it. When I finally got the courage to ask what happened, to ask where my money was, the mood turned cold. I found my parents in the kitchen. I asked my question quietly, trying not to sound accusatory. My father's face hardened. It's a tough economy, Lauren. These things happen. Don't be naive. But the interest? You said I'd get it back. That's when my mother stepped in. She put her arm around my father's shoulders, a gesture of solidarity that excluded me completely. She looked at me with disappointment, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. Don't make things awkward, sweetheart, she said, her voice soft but firm. Your father's stressed enough as it is. We don't talk about money. It's not polite. And that was it. The conversation was over. My future had been gambled away, and I wasn't even allowed to ask what had happened to it. There was no apology, no accountability, no remorse. There was just a wall of silence and the unspoken rule that I was to blame for bringing it up, for making them feel bad. That was my first lesson, the most important one my family ever taught me. It was a lesson burned into me at 19 years old. In my family, asking for what you were owed was considered disrespect. Your pain was an inconvenience to them, and their comfort was always more important than your truth. That day, I learned that the word family didn't mean a circle of support. It meant a cage of obligation. The loss of that money changed the course of my life. The easy path, the one my grandmother had tried to give me, was gone. In its place was a hard road, one I had to pave myself, one grueling hour at a time. I stayed in college. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me fail. But it was a different kind of college experience from the one I had imagined. It wasn't about learning and discovery anymore. It was about survival. I took out student loans, the very thing my inheritance was meant to prevent. The debt started piling up immediately, a heavy weight on my shoulders before my adult life had even begun. To make ends meet, I worked. I worked constantly. My days were a blur of lectures, labs, and shifts. I got a job at a coffee shop near campus that opened at 5 a.m. I would wake up in the dark, my tiny apartment cold, and walk through the empty streets to spend 3 hours foaming milk and serving muffins to people who were on their way to the lives I was supposed to have. After my morning classes, I'd run to my second job, shelving books at the university library. It was quiet there, but I was too tired to study. I just moved in a fog, pushing a cart of books, my mind numb with exhaustion. Some nights, I'd pick up a waitressing shift at a diner downtown. I'd come home late, my clothes smelling of grease, my feet aching. I would sit at my small kitchen table, the same table where I'd later buy my son a computer to do his homework, and try to study. More often than not, I'd fall asleep with my head on my textbook, a line of drool marking my place. Through all of this, my family remained distant. They never offered to help. They never sent me $100 to help with groceries. They never even asked how I was managing. When I called home, the conversations were short and superficial. "How are your classes?" my mother would ask. "They're fine," I'd say. "Getting good grades?" "Yes." "Good, that's good." She never asked if I was eating enough. She never asked if I was okay. My father would sometimes get on the phone, his voice gruff. He'd talk about the weather or a problem with his car. He never, ever mentioned the money. It was as if that transaction, that enormous betrayal, had never happened. It was a ghost that lived with me every single day, but in their house, it didn't exist. My brother, Mark, seemed to be doing just fine. They helped him with a down payment on a new truck. They co-signed for his apartment. I saw the pictures on my mother's new social media page. Mark smiling, leaning against his shiny Ford F-150. The caption read, "So proud of our boy and all his hard work." I stared at the picture, the injustice of it a burning coal in my stomach. His hard work. What about mine? Did my work not count? The day I graduated was a gray, drizzly afternoon. I sat in a folding chair on the university lawn, wearing my cap and gown. I watched as other families cheered for their children. Fathers were hugging their daughters. Mothers were crying with joy. I saw balloons and bouquets of flowers. My family wasn't there. They said the drive was too long, that my father's back was acting up. Later that evening, I checked my mother's social media. She had posted a single-line status. "Our daughter finally finished school." That was it. No photo, no congratulations. No phone call. Just that one cold, dismissive sentence. Finally finished school. As if it had been an inconvenience for them. A long, drawn-out process they had to endure. I had worked double shifts, survived on instant noodles, and cried myself to sleep from sheer exhaustion more times than I could count to get that diploma. And to them, it was just a footnote. Something hardened in me that day. I realized that I would never get their approval, and I decided I didn't want it anymore. Their validation was a currency I could no longer afford to seek. My own survival had to be enough, so I threw myself into my career. I had gotten a degree in computer science, and I moved to Denver for a job at a small tech startup. I worked harder than anyone else. I stayed late. I took on the projects no one wanted. I learned everything I could. My motivation was simple. I never wanted to be dependent on anyone ever again. I would be my own safety net. A few years later, I met Ethan's father. He was charming and fun, and for a while I thought I had found a partner. But when I got pregnant, he panicked. He wasn't ready to be a father, he said. He disappeared from my life before Ethan was even born, sending a check every month but offering nothing else. Another betrayal, but this one hurt less. I had already learned how to be alone. I knew how to survive. Raising Ethan on my own was the hardest and best thing I ever did. He became my entire world. Every decision I made was for him. I worked to give him the stability I never had. By the time I was 30, I had saved enough for a down payment on a small house in a good school district. Walking into that house for the first time after closing was a moment I will never forget. It was mine. The floors, the walls, the windows, I had earned every inch of it. I stood in the empty living room, the afternoon sun streaming in, and I cried. They were tears of relief, of pride, of sheer stubborn victory. I had done it. I had built a life for myself and my son, with no help from anyone, especially not my family. I had a good career, a beautiful child, and a home that was a sanctuary. It was a fortress built of my own hard work. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their validation. I was free of them, or so I thought. For 5 years, that house was our peaceful bubble. It was just me and Ethan. We had our routines. Homework at the kitchen table, movie nights on Fridays, lazy Saturday mornings. The silence in the house was a comfort, a sign of safety. The phone calls from my parents were infrequent, and I kept them short. I had built a wall around my life, and it was holding strong. Then, one autumn evening, the wall began to crack. The phone rang, and it was my mother. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. I felt that old, familiar knot of dread tighten in my stomach. "Lauren, it's all gone," she sobbed. Everything. My father had made a series of bad investments in the stock market, chasing a big win that never came. They had taken out a second mortgage on their house to fund his gambles. Now the market had crashed. The bank was foreclosing. They had lost everything. "We have nowhere to go," she cried. "Can we stay with you? Just for a few weeks, Lauren. Just until we get back on our feet. A few weeks." The words echoed in my head. My mind screamed, "No, don't do it. You know what will happen." But my heart, the part of me that was still a daughter, betrayed me. I heard the genuine panic in my mother's voice. I pictured them in their 60s with suitcases on the sidewalk. What was I supposed to do? Tell them no? "Okay, Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You can stay with me." For a few weeks. It was the biggest mistake of my life. They arrived 2 days later in a U-Haul truck packed to the brim. It wasn't the luggage of people staying for a few weeks. It was the furniture, the boxes, the accumulated clutter of a lifetime. They weren't visitors. They were moving in. The first week was tense but manageable. I cleared out my guest room. I made space in the closets. I tried to be welcoming, but the shift in the house was immediate. My quiet sanctuary was gone. The TV was always on, tuned to a news channel that blared with angry voices. My father took over my favorite armchair in the living room, leaving his newspapers scattered all over the floor. My mother started going through my kitchen cabinets, reorganizing everything, clucking her tongue at my choice of spices or the brand of pasta I bought. "You should really buy organic, Lauren," she'd say. "It's so much better for Ethan." She never offered to pay for the more expensive groceries. She just offered criticism. The few weeks bled into a month, then two. Their efforts to get back on their feet consisted of my father spending hours on the computer in the den, my home office, looking at stock market forms, and my mother watching daytime television. There was no talk of getting jobs, no talk of finding an apartment. Slowly, they began to take over. My mother decided she didn't like the curtains in the guest room and ordered new ones online, using my saved credit card information. When I confronted her about it, she acted wounded. "I just wanted to make the room feel a little more homey, dear. I thought you wouldn't mind." My father started complaining about things. My neighborhood was too loud. My internet was too slow. The coffee I made was too weak. He treated my home like a hotel he was dissatisfied with, and he treated me like the underperforming manager. The financial drain started to become serious. My grocery bills doubled. My utility bills skyrocketed. They contributed nothing. I was now supporting 3 people, plus myself, on my single salary. I tried to talk to them about it once. I sat them down in the living room and tried to explain, gently, that I needed some help with the bills. "Lauren, you know we don't have any money," my father said, his voice laced with indignation, as if I had accused him of a crime. "That's why we're here." "We'd help if we could, sweetheart," my mother added, her voice full of false sympathy. "You know we would, but they could." The very next day, a brand new iPhone was delivered for my mother. A week later, my father bought a new set of expensive golf clubs online. They ordered takeout for themselves almost every night. Sushi, steak, Italian food, while I cooked pasta for myself and Ethan. Their definition of no money was simply no money for bills. There was always plenty of money for their wants. I felt like I was losing my mind. I was a guest in my own house. I started staying late at work just to avoid coming home. I'd eat dinner with Ethan in his room sometimes, just so we could have a conversation without my father interrupting to complain about a politician he saw on TV. Ethan started spending more and more time at his friends' houses. My home, our safe space, had become toxic. It was suffocating me. The isolation was the worst part. I couldn't complain to anyone. How could I explain that I wanted to kick my own parents out? People would think I was a monster, a heartless daughter. The guilt was a constant companion, a heavy blanket I couldn't shake off. I had been raised to believe that family helps family, no matter what. My own feelings, my stress, my resentment, my growing anger felt selfish and wrong. I would lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of their television in the other room. I would feel the walls of my own house closing in on me. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself they would leave eventually, but deep down I knew. This wasn't a temporary situation. This was my new reality. My generosity had not been a lifeline for them. It had been an opportunity. My home was not a temporary shelter. It was their retirement plan, and I was the one who was going to pay for it. It happened on a Tuesday. The day itself was unremarkable, just another link in a long chain of exhausting days. I had a difficult meeting at work, a bug in a piece of code that took hours to fix. I picked Ethan up from soccer practice late. We were both tired and hungry. All I wanted was to come home, make a simple dinner, and have a quiet evening. As soon as I walked through the door, I knew quiet wasn't going to happen. The television was blasting from the living room, the volume so high the floor seemed to vibrate. My father was asleep in his armchair, his mouth open, snoring loudly over the noise of the TV. My mother was on the phone in the kitchen, laughing loudly with one of her friends. Piles of mail and magazines were scattered across the kitchen table, right where Ethan was supposed to do his homework. I took a deep breath, trying to hold on to the last frayed threads of my patience. "Hi, Mom," I said, setting my bag down. "Could we clear the table? Ethan has a math test tomorrow." My mother held up a finger, signaling for me to wait, and continued her conversation. She didn't even look at me. Ethan stood beside me, looking uncomfortable. He knew the rules of this house now. We wait. Our needs come second. I started clearing the table myself, stacking the magazines into a neat pile. The noise from my mother's phone call and the blaring TV was giving me a headache. I walked into the living room and gently turned the television volume down. The change in sound woke my father. He blinked, looking around in confusion, and his eyes landed on me. "What did you do?" he grumbled. "I was watching that." "You were asleep, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It was really loud." He pushed himself up from the chair, his face flushed with anger. "So what? It's my house too, isn't it?" I didn't answer. I just walked back into the kitchen. My mother had finally hung up the phone. She was leaning against the counter, a disapproving look on her face. "You shouldn't have done that, Lauren," she said. You know how he gets when he's woken up. He can't have the TV that loud all the time, Mom. We live here too. It was the wrong thing to say. My father had followed me into the kitchen. He had heard me. What's that supposed to mean? He demanded, his voice rising. You think you're better than us? You think because you got lucky with some tech job that you can tell us how to live? His face was getting redder. This was how his anger always started, like a slow-burning fire. I looked at Ethan, who was now sitting at the cleared table, his math book open but his eyes wide with fear. He was trying to make himself small, invisible. Seeing that look on my son's face was like a knife in my gut. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about him. I just want to have a little peace in my own home, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. My mother stepped forward, placing herself between me and my father, but she was facing me. She was on his side. You're being selfish, Lauren, she said, her voice sharp. You're so ungrateful. We gave you everything. You wouldn't even exist without us. It was their favorite weapon, the guilt of my own existence. They had used it on me my whole life, and for my whole life it had worked. But something was different tonight. I was too tired to feel guilty. All I felt was a cold, hard anger. My father, emboldened by my mother's support, took another step toward me. He pointed a finger at my face. We did everything for you, and what do we get in return? A daughter who resents us, who treats us like a burden. He took a breath, and his eyes swept around the kitchen, my kitchen, with its clean counters and stainless steel appliances. He looked at me, then his eyes flickered over to my son, who was frozen at the table. He curled his lip in a sneer, and then he said it, the words that had been hiding beneath all his other complaints. The true ugly thought that had been festering in his mind for months. You and that kid are freeloaders. The world stopped. It was the same line from that morning, but this time it was said in front of my child, my 12-year-old son. He looked up, his face a mask of confusion and terror. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw a question. Mom, is that what we are? In that instant, 16 years of betrayal, of neglect, of being made to feel small and unimportant, all came rushing to the surface. The stolen college fund, the lonely graduation, the years of hard work they never acknowledged, the constant criticism in my own home. It all coalesced into a single, clarifying point of light. I was done. I stood up straight. My spine felt like it was made of steel. I looked past my mother, past my father's angry face, and directly at my son. I gave him a small, reassuring look, a promise that I would fix this. Then I turned my eyes back to my father. My voice didn't shake. It was perfectly level, devoid of any emotion except a chilling finality. Then consider this my last act of charity. I walked over to the table, picked up Ethan's math book, and took his hand. Come on, sweetie, I said softly. Let's go finish this in my room. I led him out of the kitchen, leaving my parents standing there in a stunned, absolute silence. They had finally pushed me over the edge. They had burned the last bridge, and they had no idea what was coming next. They thought they had won the argument. They didn't realize they had just lost everything. I led Ethan to my bedroom and closed the door behind us. The sound of it clicking shut felt like a barricade. On this side of the door was our world. On the other side was theirs. For 10 months, there had been no barrier. Their anger, their needs, their noise had seeped into every corner of our lives. Not anymore. Ethan was still holding my hand, his grip tight. He looked up at me, his eyes full of a 12-year-old's confusion and hurt. Mom, what's a freeloader? He asked, his voice small. I knelt down in front of him so we were at eye level. I put my hands on his shoulders. I had to choose my next words very carefully. They would be more important than any mortgage payment or line of code I would ever write. A freeloader is someone who takes without giving anything back, I said, my voice soft but clear. It's what Grandpa called us. And he was wrong. This is our home, Ethan. I work very hard to pay for it. You work very hard at school. We are a team. We are not freeloaders. He seemed to process this. Then why did he say it? Because he's angry, I said. And when people are unhappy with their own lives, sometimes they try to make other people feel small. It's not about you. It's about him. Do you understand? He nodded slowly. I think so. Good, I said, pulling him into a hug. Now let's finish that math homework. We've got a test to ace tomorrow. We sat on my bed and worked through his equations. I could feel the tension slowly leave his small body. He was focusing on the numbers, on the logic of algebra, a world that made sense. I watched him, my heart aching with a fierce protective love. My parents had not just insulted me. They had aimed their poison at my son. They had tried to plant a seed of shame in him. That was the line. That was the unforgivable sin. They had made my child feel unsafe in his own home. After he was asleep, I didn't go back downstairs. I stayed in my room. I could hear the low murmur of their voices from the kitchen. They were probably planning their strategy, deciding how to make me feel guilty, how to regain control. I didn't care. The emotional hold they had on me was gone. The strings had been cut. I felt strangely calm, my mind working with a cold and absolute clarity. I opened my laptop. I didn't search for articles on family counseling or how to resolve conflict. I searched for a local real estate lawyer. I found a woman named Sarah Chen, whose website said she specialized in property law and landlord-tenant disputes. I filled out the contact form on her website, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I need to remove 2 occupants from my home, I wrote. They are family members who have overstayed their welcome and are not on any lease. Please advise on the legal process for eviction in Colorado. I hit send. The next morning, I woke up before anyone else. I made coffee and got Ethan ready for school, all in the quiet of the early dawn. When my parents finally came out of the guest room, I was already dressed for work, my briefcase by the door. I avoided eye contact. I gave them a brief, polite, good morning, and nothing else. The silence was thick with unspoken words. They were waiting for me to apologize, to smooth things over like I always did. I just drank my coffee and looked out the window. Sarah Chen called me at 9:15 a.m., just as I was settling in at my desk. Her voice was professional and calm. I explained the situation in detail. They had been there for 10 months. There was no rental agreement, they paid no bills, and the verbal agreement was for a few weeks. Okay, Lauren, she said, and the way she used my first name felt like she was on my side. Legally, because they have been residing in your home for more than a few weeks and receive mail there, they are considered month-to-month tenants, even without a written lease. You can't just change the locks. You have to follow the proper legal procedure. My heart sank a little. So I'm stuck with them? Not at all, she said reassuringly. You just have to terminate their tenancy formally. The first step is to serve them with a written notice to quit. In Colorado, for a month-to-month tenancy, you need to provide a minimum of 21 days notice. To be safe and avoid any disputes, I recommend you give them a full 30 days. The notice needs to be in writing and should clearly state the date by which they must vacate the property. 30 days. It sounded like an eternity, but it was also a finish line. What if they refuse to leave? I asked. If they are still on the property after the 30-day period, we can then file a formal eviction lawsuit with the court. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. Often, a formal notice from an attorney's office is enough to show them you're serious. That evening, Sarah emailed me a formal notice to quit document, drafted on her firm's letterhead. It was simple, direct, and brutally official. It named my parents, Daniel and Mary Mitchell, as tenants at will. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that their tenancy of the property located at my address was being terminated. It gave them a deadline, 30 days from the date of receipt. I printed 2 copies at my office. I put them in a plain manila envelope. My hand was shaking slightly as I drove home, not from fear, but from the enormity of what I was about to do. I was dismantling my family, or maybe I was just acknowledging that it had been broken for a very long time. I waited until after dinner. Ethan was in his room playing a video game. My parents were in the living room, watching television, acting as if nothing had happened the night before. This was their method. Ignore the conflict until it went away. I walked into the room and stood in front of the TV. I held the envelope in my hand. I need to talk to you both, I said. My father glared at me. We're watching a show. This is important. I opened the envelope and handed a copy of the notice to each of them. My mother took hers hesitantly, looking at it like it was a bomb. My father snatched his from my hand. There was a long silence as they read. I watched their faces. My father's turned a dark, blotchy red. My mother's went completely white. What is this? My father finally choked out, the paper trembling in his hand. An eviction notice? You're evicting your own parents? It's a notice to quit, I said, my voice steady. You have 30 days to find another place to live. My mother started to cry. They were not the quiet, sad tears of a grieving woman. They were loud, performative sobs, designed for maximum effect. Lauren, how could you? She wailed. After everything we've done for you, we're your family. You're throwing us out on the street. You have 30 days, I repeated. That's more than enough time to make arrangements. My father shot to his feet. You ungrateful, heartless brat, he shouted, his voice booming through the house. I saw Ethan's bedroom door crack open an inch. We have nowhere to go. We have no money. You know that? You're doing this just to be cruel. This was the moment. This was the guilt trip I had been programmed my entire life to fall for. But the programming was broken. I walked over to the bookshelf where I kept my files. I pulled out a thin black folder. I had started it about a month after they moved in, a silent accounting of my own life. I opened it and took out a stack of papers. It was a spreadsheet I had meticulously updated every week. I laid the first page on the coffee table in front of them. "This is for you," I said. The page was titled, "Financial Support Provided to Daniel and Mary Mitchell." It was itemized, line by line, date by date. Additional grocery costs, $4,800 over 10 months. Increase in electricity bill, $750. Increase in water bill, $420. Internet and cable, which you use more than I do, $200. The new curtains you ordered for your room on my credit card, $210. The emergency plumbing call when you clogged the upstairs toilet with flushable wipes, $300. I continued to lay out the pages. Bank statements highlighted with their takeout orders charged to a joint account I had foolishly linked them to for emergencies. Receipts from the electronics store for their new phones. The invoice for my father's new golf clubs. "You've cost me $14,280 in the last 10 months, I said, my voice as flat and unemotional as the numbers on the page. "That doesn't include the roof over your head or the general wear and tear on my home. It's just the direct, trackable costs." The shouting stopped. The crying stopped. There was a dead silence in the room, broken only by the faint sound of the muted television. They stared at the papers, at the undeniable black and white proof of their dependency. Their narrative of the generous put-upon parents had just collided with a wall of facts. My mother looked up from the spreadsheet, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her voice was a shocked whisper. "You kept track?" I looked her straight in the eye. All the pain, all the years of feeling invisible, of my needs being secondary, were in my next words. "I had to," I replied, "because no one else ever did." The power in the room had shifted for good. This wasn't an emotional argument anymore, which was the only kind of fight they knew how to win. This was a legal and financial transaction, and in this transaction, I held all the cards. I owned the house. I had the documents. I had the truth, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid to use it. The 30 days that followed were the longest of my life. The house was no longer a home. It was a Cold War zone. My parents and I moved around each other like ghosts, the silence thick with resentment. They stopped speaking to me directly, communicating instead through loud, pointed sighs and slammed doors. My mother would often be on the phone in the kitchen, talking to my Aunt Carol or one of her church friends, her voice loud enough for me to hear every word. "I just don't know what we did wrong." "Carol," she'd say, her voice trembling with manufactured tears. "We raised her to be a good person, and now she's throwing her sick elderly parents out onto the street. She has all this money, a big house, and she can't find it in her heart to help her own family." The story they spun was a masterpiece of victimhood. In their version, they were frail, penniless elders, and I was a cold, materialistic monster, corrupted by my success. They conveniently left out the 10 months of free lodging, the thousands of dollars in expenses I had covered, and the verbal abuse that had been the final straw. The smear campaign began in earnest. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years started calling me. My uncle, my father's brother, left a furious voicemail telling me I should be ashamed of myself. A cousin sent me a long, sanctimonious text message about the importance of honoring thy father and mother. It was a coordinated attack, designed to shame me into backing down. In the past, it would have worked. I would have been consumed with guilt. I would have agonized over what people thought of me. I would have caved. But something inside me had fundamentally changed. I listened to the voicemails and deleted them. I read the texts and blocked the numbers. I refused to engage. I would not defend myself. I realized that to jade, justify, argue, defend, or explain would be to legitimize their false narrative. It would be accepting their premise that I had done something wrong that required an explanation. I had done nothing wrong. I had set a boundary. My silence was my new form of power. It drove them crazy. They were used to getting a reaction from me. Tears, frustration, a retreat into quiet compliance. My calm indifference was a language they didn't understand. About 2 weeks into the 30-day notice period, I was looking for a new STEM summer program for Ethan. He was passionate about robotics, and there was an advanced camp at the local university that was perfect for him, but it was expensive. Staring at the tuition fee, an idea began to form in my mind. It started as a practical thought, a way to escape the toxic atmosphere of the house during the final days of their stay, but it quickly grew into something more. I didn't want to be in the house when they finally left. I didn't want a dramatic, tearful goodbye or a final ugly confrontation. I wanted it to be clean and impersonal. So I called a property management company. I told them I wanted to rent out my house for 3 months, starting the day after my parents' notice period ended. It was a bold move, almost reckless, but it felt right. It felt like taking back control in the most definitive way possible. The property manager, a brisk and efficient woman named Linda, had the house listed online within days. We had a signed lease with a nice young family, a couple with a toddler, before the week was out. They needed a place to stay while their new home was being built. It was perfect. I found a small, furnished apartment for me and Ethan to sublet for the same 3-month period. It was a fraction of the size of our house, but the thought of it felt like a breath of fresh air. It would be our space, just ours. I didn't tell my parents about my plan. I started packing my and Ethan's things discreetly, putting boxes in my car after they went to bed. They were so consumed with their own drama, with finding a place to live, which they complained about constantly, that they barely noticed what I was doing. They managed to find a small 1-bedroom apartment in a senior living community across town. It was all they could afford, and they made sure I knew how much of a downgrade it was. The day they were scheduled to move out, I took a personal day from work. I dropped Ethan off at school and then went to a coffee shop. I didn't want to be there to watch. At noon, I got a text from my father. "The truck is loaded. We left the key on the counter." That was it. No goodbye. No thank you for the 10 months of shelter. Just a cold final message. I didn't go back to the house right away. Instead, I drove to the furnished apartment and started unpacking the few boxes I had brought for me and Ethan. An hour later, Linda, the property manager, called. "Hi, Lauren. Just wanted to let you know your parents are out and I've done the walkthrough. The new tenants are moving in this afternoon. The first month's rent and the security deposit have been deposited into your account." I hung up the phone and opened my banking app. There it was. A deposit for more than enough to cover the rent on our temporary apartment and the tuition for Ethan's STEM camp. I stared at the number on the screen. It was more than just money. It was restitution. It was a quiet, clean, and elegant form of revenge. They had called me a freeloader in my own house. Now, their absence was paying for my son's future. That evening, when I brought Ethan to our new temporary home, he was ecstatic. He loved the novelty of it, the different view from the window, the fact that we were on an adventure. We ordered pizza and ate it on the floor, because there was only a small dining table with 2 chairs. We laughed more than we had in months. The air was light. There was no tension, no fear of saying the wrong thing, no oppressive cloud of resentment hanging over us. Guilt tried to creep in, as it always did. A little voice in the back of my mind whispered, "They are in a tiny apartment while you are here, safe. You kicked out your own parents." But this time I had a weapon to fight back. I looked at my son's smiling face, his cheeks smudged with tomato sauce. I thought of him tiptoeing around the house, trying not to disturb his grandfather. I thought of the fear in his eyes when he was called a freeloader, and I knew I had made the right choice. My responsibility was to him. My job was to provide him with a stable, safe, and loving home. I had failed at that for 10 months because I was trying to fulfill an obligation to people who had never shown me the same care. I had taken my house, a source of immense stress and pain, and turned it into an asset that was actively improving our lives. Every time a pang of guilt tried to surface, I would picture Ethan at his robotics camp, building something amazing, his mind alight with possibility. He deserved that stability. He deserved that opportunity. They did not deserve my sacrifice. Not anymore. The house was mine. The money was mine. And most importantly, my peace was mine. I had taken it all back. For the first few weeks, we lived in our sunny little apartment, and the silence from my family was absolute. I knew the smear campaign was likely still churning in the background, but without direct contact, it was just distant noise. I focused on work, on Ethan, on enjoying the simple peace of our new temporary life. We explored the new neighborhood, found a favorite park, and settled into a rhythm that was all our own. It was calm. The shift happened on a Wednesday afternoon. I was at work when my phone buzzed with a call from a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was from my hometown. I almost ignored it, assuming it was another relative calling to lecture me, but something made me answer. "Lauren, it's your Aunt Carol, my mother's sister." Her primary confidant and the one I was sure had heard the most embellished version of the story. I braced myself for a wave of accusations, but her voice wasn't angry. It was thick with tears. "Oh, Lauren, I am so sorry," she sobbed into the phone. "I've been a fool." I was stunned into silence. "Aunt Carol, what's wrong? I saw your mother's post on Facebook last night," she explained, her voice catching. She put up this long, dramatic story about how you cruelly kicked them out with nowhere to go. She posted a picture of their new little apartment, making it look like a prison cell. "Here it comes," I thought. "But then," Carol continued, "one of my friends, Martha, you remember her, she commented on it. She asked your mom a simple question. She said, 'Mary, wasn't Lauren letting you live with her for a while before this?' And then it all started to unravel. According to Carol, people started asking questions in the comments. How long had they been living with me? Did they pay rent? What exactly happened? My mother, unprepared for any challenge to her victim narrative, gave vague, evasive answers. Then she started deleting the questions she didn't like. It just looked so suspicious, Carol said. So I called her. I asked her point blank. I said, Mary, tell me the truth. How long were you there? And she admitted it. 10 months. And then I asked if she and Dan had helped you with the bills. There was this long silence. And then she said that you had a good job and didn't need their help. Lauren, she left out the part where they lived rent-free for almost a year. She left out everything that made her look bad. I listened, my hand gripping the phone. I didn't say anything. I just let her talk. I feel so terrible, she said, crying again. I believed her. I was angry with you. I said some things to other family members, and I was wrong. I am so sorry. What you did wasn't heartless. It was self-preservation. It was the first time anyone in my family had validated my experience. It was the first time someone had seen through my parents' act and recognized the truth. The relief was so overwhelming it felt like a physical weight lifting off my chest. It's okay, Aunt Carol, I said, my own voice a little shaky. Thank you for calling. That phone call was the first crack in the dam. Aunt Carol, filled with a convert's zeal, made it her mission to set the record straight. She called the same relatives my parents had poisoned against me. She told them the whole story. The 10 months, the lack of financial contribution, the verbal insults. The narrative began to shift. The whispers changed. Did you hear Dan and Mary were living off Lauren for free? I heard Dan has a nasty temper with her. Suddenly, I wasn't the ungrateful daughter anymore. I was the one who had finally stood up for herself. People who had known my parents for years started to see a pattern of behavior they had previously overlooked. My father's arrogance, my mother's penchant for drama. The most telling sign of the shift was the silence from my parents. A week after my aunt's phone call, I looked up my mother's Facebook profile. It was gone, deleted. They had taken their story and vanished from the public square where it had been so soundly defeated. When their audience no longer saw them as victims, they had nothing left to say. They couldn't operate in a world that demanded accountability. The 3 months passed quickly. The day before the lease on my house was up, I got the keys back from the property management company. Ethan and I walked into our home together. It felt different. It was the same house, but the energy was new. It was clean, not just physically, but emotionally. The oppressive weight of my parents' presence was gone, scrubbed away by time and distance. We decided to make it our own again, in a way we never had before. We spent the first weekend painting. I painted the living room a warm, calming shade of gray, and Ethan, as I had promised, got to paint his room. He chose a bright, optimistic blue, the color of a clear sky. We rolled up the carpets, put on old clothes, and blasted music. We got paint on our faces and in our hair. We were not just redecorating, we were performing a ritual of reclamation. I bought a new coffee maker and threw the old one, the one my father had complained about every morning, in the trash. I rearranged the furniture in the living room, moving my favorite armchair back to its rightful place by the window. We planted a small garden in the backyard, with tomatoes and basil. We were putting down new roots, in our own soil. One evening, a few weeks after we had moved back in, Ethan and I were in the living room. He was showing me a design for a robot he had made at his STEM camp, his face animated with excitement. The house was filled with his happy chatter, with the sound of laughter that didn't have to be quiet, with a peace that felt solid and real. I looked around at the newly painted walls, at the furniture arranged just the way we liked it, at my son, thriving and secure. I had fought for this. I had endured the gossip, the guilt, the loneliness, and I had won. I had won back my home, not just the physical structure of wood and drywall, but the sanctuary it was always meant to be. We had filled the walls with an unapologetic joy, a peace that was earned, a silence that was finally, truly, comfortable. A year went by. A year of quiet, beautiful, blessedly normal life. The rhythm of our days was predictable in the best possible way. School, work, homework, dinner. Weekends spent at the park or working on Ethan's latest project. The drama with my parents faded into the background, becoming a scar that was no longer tender to the touch. It was simply a part of my story, a reminder of a battle I had fought and survived. Ethan was flourishing. The STEM camp had ignited a passion in him, and he was now the star of his school's robotics club. He was confident and happy. The fear I had seen in his eyes that night in the kitchen replaced by the bright curiosity of a boy who felt safe in his world. Seeing him thrive was the only proof I ever needed that I had made the right choice. My career was going well too. Without the constant drain of my parents' needs, financial and emotional, I had more energy and focus for my work. I got a promotion, and for the first time I felt a sense of genuine financial security, a security I had built entirely on my own. I had no contact with my parents. After their social media disappearance, they had fallen completely silent. I didn't know if they were okay, and I found that I was okay with not knowing. The bond of obligation had been so thoroughly broken that the cord of worry had dissolved with it. Then, one Saturday afternoon, the mail came. Tucked between a gas bill and a grocery store flyer was a single plain white envelope. My name and address were written on the front in a shaky, familiar handwriting. My mother's. There was no return address. My heart didn't pound. My hands didn't shake. I simply felt a sense of detached curiosity. I placed the rest of the mail on the counter and took the letter into the living room. I sat in my armchair, the one by the window, and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, torn from a notepad. The message was short, just 2 sentences written in that same trembling script. "We're sorry," it read. "We didn't realize what we were asking of you." I read the words over and over again. I tried to find a hint of genuine remorse, a flicker of accountability, but the words were hollow. "We didn't realize what we were asking of you." No, I thought, that wasn't it. That wasn't the truth. They knew exactly what they were asking. They were asking for my home, my money, my time, my energy, my peace. They were asking me to set myself on fire to keep them warm. They had been asking it of me my entire life in ways big and small, from the stolen inheritance to the expectation that I would absorb their every complaint and criticism. They had always known what they were asking. The real truth was in the unspoken part of that sentence. They just didn't expect me to say no. They had never planned for that. Their entire relationship with me was built on the foundation of my compliance. When that foundation crumbled, the whole structure fell apart. This letter wasn't an apology for their actions. It was an expression of surprise at my reaction. It was the regret of a gambler who had finally lost a bet they thought was a sure thing. I folded the letter and placed it on the table beside me. For a moment I considered what to do. Should I write back? Should I call? The old Lauren, the one programmed to be the peacemaker, would have seen this as an opening, an opportunity to heal the family. But I wasn't that person anymore. I realized that forgiveness didn't have to be a conversation. It didn't require a response. It didn't require me to absolve them or make them feel better about what they had done. Forgiveness, I understood now, was a quiet internal act. It was for me. It was about me letting go of the anger and the resentment that I had carried for so long. It was about accepting that they were who they were, and that I could not change them. My peace did not depend on their apology being sincere. My peace depended on me no longer needing one. I didn't reply to the letter. I didn't have to. My silence was not a punishment. It was a boundary. It was the final, definitive statement that the conversation was over. I chose peace. I chose my new life. Later that evening, Ethan and I were cleaning out the office. We were going through a box of old files when I came across a large, important-looking folder. I opened it. Inside was the property deed to my house, the official document with my name on it, clear and bold. I pulled it out and held it. The paper felt heavy, substantial. It was more than just a legal document. It was a symbol of everything I had worked for, everything I had protected. Ethan came over to see what I was looking at. "What's that?" he asked. "This is the deed to our house," I said, turning to show him. I pointed to my name. "See this? This says that this house belongs to me, that it belongs to us." I looked at him, at his bright, intelligent eyes, and I wanted him to understand the lesson I had learned so painfully. "See this?" I said, my voice full of a quiet strength I had never known I possessed. "This isn't just a house. It's a boundary." He looked from the paper to my face, and a slow smile spread across his lips. He understood. He had lived through it with me. He knew what that word meant now. It meant safety. It meant peace. It meant home. "It's home, Mom," he said. He was right, and it always would be. A home built not just with wood and nails, but with the hard-won clarity of a woman who finally knew her own worth. The lesson every survivor learns. I turned to the camera, my expression steady, my voice calm. The living room is quiet behind me, filled with the soft light of a setting sun. It is peaceful. It is mine. If someone calls you ungrateful for protecting your peace, remember this. People who depend on your silence will always call your boundaries betrayal. I take a soft, slow breath. If you've ever been the strong one, the one who gives and gives, only to be called heartless the first time you say no, this is for you. You are not the villain of their story. You are the hero of your own. I looked directly into the lens. a flicker of a knowing smile on my face. If you've ever had to fight for your own home, in every sense of the word, hit that like button and subscribe if you're done being guilted for saying no.